Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The world of Harry Potter films hides much more than we see on the screen. Behind the scenes lie moments that could have changed the way we perceive the characters and events. Today I'll tell you about the deleted moments that should have stayed in the movies. Number 1, the piggy tale. In Philosopher's Stone there is a scene forever remembered by fans. Hagrid bursts into the Dursleys' home, hands Harry his letter, and gives Dudley a pig's tail. Funny, maybe, but if you think about it, it's actually a tragedy. What did the boy feel being turned into a laughingstock? The film leaves us without an answer, but Rowling's book explains Dudley had to go to a Muggle hospital. "We'll have to take Dudley to the hospital," Uncle Vernon grunted. "He'll have to have that damned tail removed before he goes to school." Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. The film simply takes Harry away with Hagrid, leaving Dudley with his problem. Yet this episode vividly shows that magic can wound no less than any disease. Number 2. Who Am I? Gilderoy Lockhart, struck by his own backfired spell in Chamber of Secrets, disappears from the movies without a trace. But the books don't let him go so easily. With his memory gone, he ends up in St. Mungo's hospital. Harry and his friends bump into their former teacher while visiting Mr. Weasley. "Hello there," beamed Lockhart in his lilac robe. "Would you like my autograph?" Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. He's kept in isolation, dangerous even to himself. He doesn't know who he is, where he's going, or how to come back. Nobody visits him, though once he was a star. Only letters from loyal fans occasionally find their way to him. The scene never made it to the screen, yet the director even considered a cameo. The only reminder of him in the films is a cheeky Easter egg. After the credits of Chamber of Secrets, in the window of Flourish and Blots, you can spot his book, Who Am I?, with the author's photo in a straitjacket. Number 3, the Invisible Army. In the films, life at Hogwarts looks carefree. Food appears by itself. The castle is always spotless. But the books reveal that behind this magic stand hundreds of house elves. They cook, clean, and tend to the school, an existence of voluntary slavery. Hermione, outraged upon learning this, created SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. Harry and Ron were reluctantly dragged into her crusade. 100 tiny elves lined the walls of the kitchen, bowing to Harry. They all wore identical tea towels with the Hogwarts crest, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. This entire layer of the story was cut from the films, yet it could have revealed an essential side of the wizarding world, that even in a fairy tale, social inequality exists. Number 4, the Half-Blood Prince. In Half-Blood Prince, Harry suddenly excels at potions, all thanks to a mysterious textbook filled with notes signed only by the Half-Blood Prince. The film's ending left many puzzled. Why did Snape reveal his nickname to Harry? The answer is simple. He understood everything after Harry cast Sectum Sempra. But what does Half-Blood Prince mean? The books uncover the truth. Severus's mother was the witch Eileen Prince. His father was the muggle Tobias Snape. That's how the name emerged, hiding the man who played one of the most pivotal roles in Harry's fate. "I dug through the prophet and found a note saying Eileen Prince married Tobias Snape," Hermione explained. So he's Half-Prince, Harry Potter, and the Half-Blood Prince. This revelation in the film feels rushed, but if the book's details had been included, Snape's story would have been far clearer and more tragic. Number 5, Farewell to Peeves. Peeves was chaos given form, and the books made sure readers felt it. He sang rhymes like "Oh Potter, you rotter," dumped ink on students, and blew raspberries at teachers. Yet when war reached Hogwarts, Peeves did not flee. He turned his tricks against the intruders. In the Deathly Hallows, Rowling writes, Peeves swooped over them, loose-limbed and airborne, banging on a drum he had conjured and singing a victory song. It was a moment of strange triumph, the castle itself fighting back through its most unruly spirit. The films erased him completely, even though Rick Mayall filmed scenes in the role. Without Peeves, Hogwarts lost a layer of personality. He was not just comic relief, he was the school's mischief, its refusal to bend to rules, its living spirit of rebellion. When he fought against Voldemort's forces, he showed that even nonsense has value when it stands on the right side. Peeves was proof that freedom, laughter, and defiance could be weapons too. Number 6, Neville's Pain and Truth. Neville Longbottom's story carries a quiet tragedy the films never truly explored. His parents, Alice and Frank Longbottom, were Aurors who defied Voldemort. For that they were tortured with the Cruciatus curse by Bellatrix Lestrange and her followers. They did not die, but their minds shattered beyond repair. Neville was raised by his strict grandmother, Augusta, who pushed him to be strong while he silently bore the weight of parents who no longer knew his name. The most heartbreaking moment comes in The Order of the Phoenix. At St. Mungo's Hospital, Harry, Ron, and Hermione witness Neville visiting his parents. His mother, lost in confusion, approaches him with a crumpled sweet wrapper. She presses it into his hand as if it were treasure. Neville accepts it quietly, his eyes shining, and tucks it away. Rowling writes, "He pocketed it as though it were a precious gift." That small act shows a boy's love for parents who cannot return it, and a loyalty that goes beyond reason. This grief explains Neville's courage. He is not a hero who appears suddenly in the Battle of Hogwarts. He is a boy forged by loss and silent resilience. When he stands against Voldemort and draws the sword of Gryffindor, he does so with the strength of someone who has lived with pain every day of his life. The films gave him bravery. The books gave him heartbreak, and that heartbreak made him unshakable. Number 7. The Secret of Ariana Dumbledore. Ariana Dumbledore's story is one of the darkest threads in the series, yet the films barely whisper her name. She was attacked by Muggle boys when she was 6, an assault that left her terrified of using magic openly. Her powers turned inward, unstable and explosive. Kendra Dumbledore, her mother, kept her hidden, but tragedy struck again when Ariana's uncontrollable magic killed her. From then on, Aberforth watched over his sister, furious at the burden that fell on their family. The true disaster came when Albus befriended Gellert Grindelwald. Their youthful dreams of reshaping the world clashed with Aberforth's devotion to Ariana. A fight broke out between the three boys. Spells flew, and in the chaos Ariana was struck dead. Rowling wrote in the Deathly Hallows, "She was killed, and nobody knew which of them had done it." For Albus, this was a wound that never healed. It turned ambition into caution, brilliance into guilt. This secret explains the man Harry comes to know. Dumbledore, once brilliant and reckless, became a leader haunted by the fear of his own power. His tenderness toward Harry, his constant reminders about choice and responsibility come from this guilt. Without Ariana's death, Dumbledore might have been a very different figure. The films show the wise old headmaster. The books show the broken brother who carried a ghost. Number 8. Hermione's first love. Hermione's first dance with Victor Crumb at the Yule Ball shocked everyone. She appeared not as the bookish girl with ink-stained hands, but as a young woman whose beauty and confidence silenced even Ron. Rowling wrote, Hermione was wearing robes of a floaty periwinkle blue material, and she was holding herself differently somehow. It was quite a transformation. The Goblet of Fire. This was not a simple date. It was a declaration that Hermione was more than the clever sidekick. Crumb's interest in her was genuine. He invited her to visit him in Bulgaria, and their connection stretched beyond the ball. Of course, he never really writes to anyone, Hermione admitted shyly when Harry asked, but he writes to me nearly every week. These letters painted a picture of a relationship built on admiration and trust, not just glamour. Yet the films reduce it to a passing crush, never showing the depth that made Ron clench his fists in jealousy. Ron's reaction was crucial. He mocked Hermione with bitterness, asking if she planned to move to Bulgaria and marry Crumb. Hermione snapped back with fury. "Next time, ask me before someone else does, and not as a last resort." That fight revealed both her longing to be valued and Ron's fear of losing her. Their future romance was seeded not in comedy, but in tension, pain, and the very real threat of someone else seeing Hermione's worth before Ron did. By ignoring this arc, the film stripped away a key piece of Hermione's journey. She was not only the brightest witch of her age, she was a girl experiencing first love, jealousy, and heartbreak. Victor Crumb gave her that awakening. Through him, readers saw her step out of the library and into her own identity, ready to be loved and to choose who deserved her heart. Number 9. The Fate of Winky. Winky's story is one of the darkest threads Rowling wove into the saga, yet it never reached the screen. She had been devoted to the Crouch family, serving Barty Crouch Sr. with unquestioning loyalty. When Barty Jr. was discovered using dark magic at the Quidditch World Cup, Winky was blamed. "Winky is being freed," Crouch declared coldly in the Goblet of Fire, handing her a sock. For humans, freedom was a gift. For Winky, it was shame. She wept, begging to remain in service, and her cries echoed a truth the films erased. House elves were bound to their masters not only by magic, but by identity. After her dismissal, Winky found refuge in the kitchens of Hogwarts, but she did not heal. She sank into despair, clutching butterbeer after butterbeer, drunk and shaking. Rowling described her as swaying slightly, her eyes glazed. This image shocked readers. A creature meant to embody tireless service had become a victim of addiction. The 3 broomsticks became her escape, and even the other elves looked at her with pity. She was a living reminder that freedom without purpose can feel like a curse. Hermione tried to intervene. Through SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, she knitted socks and hats, hoping to coax Winky into embracing independence. But Winky shoved them away, hissing, "Winky is not liking clothes." Her defiance showed that slavery was not a simple chain to be broken. For some elves, it was a part of who they were, and tearing it away left them empty. Rowling let the tragedies sit heavy and unresolved, a commentary on the complexity of liberation. The absence of Winky in the films stripped away this painful but important story. Without her, the audience never saw how elves could suffer when torn from their roles, or how trauma and loyalty twisted into despair. In Winky, Rowling gave us the cost of freedom when it comes without healing, and in her tears and trembling hands, the wizarding world felt achingly human. Number 10. The Secret Slytherin Club. Slytherin House was never only about cruelty and ambition twisted into darkness. The books give hints that inside its stone walls there were small groups of friends, just as tight-knit as Harry's circle. They shared secrets, passed down family lore, and tested spells far from teachers' eyes. Rowling wrote in The Half-Blood Prince that Slytherin will help you on your way to greatness. Greatness does not always mean evil. For some, it meant cleverness, resourcefulness, and bonds of loyalty that films never bothered to show. Take the example of Horace Slughorn's famous Slug Club. This was not a secret order against Voldemort, but it showed how Slytherins gathered together, valuing connections and ideas. Slughorn adored talented students like Blaise Zabini and Daphne Greengrass, who were ambitious but never branded as Death Eaters. These little societies, based on friendship and knowledge, mirrored Dumbledore's army more than they mirrored Voldemort's ranks. Yet on screen, Slytherin remained painted in one colour, dark green and silver villains. Even in the Battle of Hogwarts, not every Slytherin turned away to join the enemy. Pansy Parkinson may have shouted, "But he's there! Potter's there!" in the Deathly Hallows, urging the school to hand Harry over, but others stayed silent. Some slipped into hidden corners, some fought quietly alongside their classmates, refusing to let their school become a slaughterhouse. They may not have been heroes in shining armor, but they were not traitors either. The quiet resistance of unnamed Slytherins was a detail erased in the films, but alive in the book's atmosphere. Rowling wanted readers to see Slytherin as complex. Not all snakes served the Dark Lord. The tiny circles of study and whispered alliances inside that house proved it. Just as Gryffindor had cowards and Ravenclaw had fools, Slytherin had students who believed in loyalty, knowledge, and survival above blind devotion to evil. The films denied us this texture, but the books whispered it in the background, waiting for careful readers to notice. Number 11. Ron, the Chess Genius. Ron Weasley stood before the massive chessboard in the dungeons beneath Hogwarts. The pieces loomed over him, towering giants of stone and steel. Harry and Hermione looked at him with a mixture of fear and trust. It was Ron who had to lead them through the game. He didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, voice steady, giving orders as though born to it. "We're playing wizard's chess. Harry, you'll be the bishop. Hermione, the rook.
And I'll be a knight." That was his choice. Not safety, but sacrifice. Rowling makes it clear this was not blind luck. Ron had always loved wizard's chess, and he was good at it. Better than anyone in his family. In the book, Harry watches in awe as Ron calculates the enemy's moves. He's really good at chess, Harry thinks, realizing that Ron is guiding them toward victory. Each command came with precision. When he saw the right path, he accepted the risk. His knight would be taken, but it was the only way to win. He turned to Harry before the final move. "Do you want to stop Snape or not?" That moment was not just about a game. It revealed Ron's hidden strength. He was more than the comic relief, more than the loyal friend at Harry's side. He had the mind of a strategist. Later in the series, this talent surfaced again. During the Battle of Hogwarts, it was Ron who remembered to use the basilisk fangs in the Chamber of Secrets to destroy Hufflepuff's cup. That was no accident. He could see connections, find solutions under pressure, and act when it mattered most. The films trimmed this depth away. On screen, Ron's victory looked like a lucky break. But the book makes the truth undeniable. Ron was a chess master, a thinker, someone who could calculate danger and embrace it. His move on the giant board was more than bravery. It was proof that even the boy who joked and stumbled through school could, when the moment demanded it, become the one to sacrifice himself so that others could win. Number 12. The Marauders' Secret. The Marauders' map is introduced in the films as a clever, magical artifact, a piece of parchment that reveals every hidden corner of Hogwarts and shows the footsteps of those who wander within its walls. Yet the films treat it almost like a convenient plot device given to Harry by Fred and George Weasley without context or history. In the books, however, the map is steeped in story, born from the friendship and ingenuity of four young men whose lives shaped Harry's destiny long before he ever held the map in his hands. James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew were not merely mischievous students. They were the Marauders, bound by secrets, loyalty, and the kind of friendship that made even impossible acts achievable. It is important to remember the world in which the Marauders came of age. Hogwarts, with all its enchantments and rules, was still a place where clever students could bend reality to their will if they were daring enough. James Potter, known for his confidence and talent, was a natural leader. Sirius Black, rebellious and brilliant, was drawn to mischief as a way of defying his oppressive pure-blood family. Remus Lupin carried the terrible burden of lycanthropy, a condition that turned him into a werewolf every full moon. Peter Pettigrew, though often overlooked, found validation in the admiration of his stronger friends. Together they did not just play pranks, they reshaped their world in ways most adult wizards would have thought unthinkable. The most extraordinary of their achievements was their decision to become animagi. This detail, so vital in the books, is almost entirely erased from the films.
To support Remus during his dangerous transformations, the three boys studied and trained for years until they could transform themselves into animals at will. "They couldn't keep me company as humans," Remus explains in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, "so they kept me company as animals." James became a stag, earning the nickname Prongs. Sirius took the form of a massive black dog, Padfoot. Peter transformed into a rat, Wormtail. These names, etched into the Marauders' map, were not random code words, but the essence of who they were. The creation of the map itself was not a casual act. It required not just magical skill, but deep knowledge of Hogwarts, its wards, and its secrets. The Marauders spent years exploring every hallway, every secret passage, every forbidden corridor. Their midnight wanderings were not acts of rebellion alone. They were steps toward building a living memory of their friendship. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Lupin reflects, "We used to sneak out of school and go down to the village, and the map never lies. The map was a record of us, of everything we did." The films show Harry merely receiving a folded parchment, but the books reveal the map as the culmination of years of companionship and shared danger. The nicknames the Marauders gave one another were not only whimsical but deeply personal. Remus was Moony, a name both affectionate and cruel, a reminder of his condition. James was Prongs, the proud stag. Sirius was Padfoot, the dog whose form gave him freedom. Peter was Wormtail, the rat, whose smallness reflected both his ability and his personality. The films never linger on these names, leaving audiences unaware of how they tied directly to the lives of Harry's father and his friends. For readers, however, the nicknames are keys to understanding the Marauders' bond, symbols of their courage and their vulnerabilities. One of the most poignant losses in the films is the absence of James Potter as a fully realized character. Harry often learns about his father second-hand through the eyes of others, but the Marauders' backstory in the books allows readers to glimpse the young man James once was. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry sees James in Snape's memory, cocky and mischievous, using his talents to humiliate others. Yet this same James was also a boy who would risk anything to protect a friend, who gave up his own safety to accompany Remus into danger. The Marauders' map is more than enchanted parchment. It is a silent testimony to James's brilliance and devotion. Sirius Black's life, too, cannot be separated from the story of the Marauders. His escape from Azkaban, his loyalty to Harry, and his bitter feud with Severus Snape all trace back to those years in Hogwarts. The map is a reminder that Sirius once had a family of choice in his friends, a group that accepted him when his own household rejected him. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry hears Lupin speak of Sirius and James. They were the cleverest students in the school, highly intelligent, highly gifted, but they never understood the value of rules. The films capture Sirius as the godfather, but they do not show the boy who once risked everything to be Moony's protector. Remus Lupin is perhaps the most tragic of the Marauders, for he carried not only the scars of his transformations, but also the grief of surviving when all his friends were gone. In the films, Lupin is gentle and reserved, but the books allow readers to see him as a boy, filled with gratitude for the friendship that gave him a semblance of normal life. "They risked a great deal for me," he admits in Prisoner of Azkaban. That risk included years of practice, deception, and nightly wanderings beneath the full moon. The map was born out of this loyalty, a project that symbolized their unity in the face of danger. Number 13, Petunia's unbearable pain. Petunia Dursley has always been cast in the films as a cold, sharp-tongued woman whose presence in Harry Potter's life is nothing more than an oppressive shadow. On screen, she scowls, slams doors, and speaks in a clipped tone that makes every scene with her feel suffocating. To many viewers, she is a caricature of bitterness, the embodiment of cruelty wrapped in suburban normality. Yet the books reveal a fragment of truth that alters this perception entirely, a hidden piece of Petunia's story that was stripped away when the films chose simplicity over depth. This omission leaves behind a hollow version of a woman whose life had once been filled with dreams that never came true. The clue comes not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a desperate moment of confession. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, when Hagrid arrives to deliver Harry's Hogwarts letter in person, the Dursleys are shaken in ways they never expected. Vernon blusters with indignation, but it is Petunia whose words sting with the most venom. She lashes out, her voice trembling with years of bottled fury. She says, "My sister, being what she was, my parents were so proud of her. It was Lily this and Lily that. They were so pleased to have a witch in the family. Then she met that Potter at school and they got married, and she had you, and of course I knew you'd be the same, just as strange, just as abnormal." In those sentences lies not just hatred but also pain, the agony of being the one left behind. Later in the series, Rowling grants us a sharper revelation. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Harry hears Petunia cry out in despair, "I know what Dementors are." Shocked, he realizes she is no stranger to the world he belongs to. And then comes the most heartbreaking detail. Petunia once received a letter from Dumbledore. In her youth, she wrote to him, begging to be allowed into Hogwarts, asking to be trained like her sister. She was not ignorant, not blind to the wonders that had swept Lily away. She had been on the edges of that world, pressing her hands to the glass, but never invited inside. Rowling leaves it at that, but the weight of it lingers long after the page is turned. The films ignore this detail entirely. They paint Petunia as irredeemably spiteful, without motive, without history. To the casual viewer, she is nothing more than an archetype, the cruel aunt who serves as a foil to Harry's innocence. But the books demand more empathy from us. Imagine a young girl standing in the shadow of her gifted sister, yearning to belong to something greater. She writes a trembling letter to the headmaster of Hogwarts, not knowing if he will ever read it. And when the reply comes, it is not the acceptance she longed for, but a quiet rejection, the message that she is ordinary, destined for the grey streets of a world without enchantment. That sting never left her. It festered into envy, then into resentment, and finally into the brittle armour she wore as an adult. Consider the scene in The Order of the Phoenix where Petunia receives the howler from Dumbledore. It is the only time in the series that Harry sees his aunt visibly shaken to her core by something connected to the magical world. The howler roars, "Remember my last, Petunia." In that moment, we understand that Petunia had corresponded with Dumbledore before, that a bond existed between them that no one else in her family knew. The line is chilling because it forces us to realize that Petunia has been complicit in the magical world all along. She could never escape it, no matter how hard she tried to scrub it away with Dudley's achievements or Vernon's normality. Beneath her rigid facade, she is a woman still haunted by the life she was never allowed to have. Petunia's treatment of Harry, then, is not simply cruelty for cruelty's sake. He is the living reminder of what she lost. Every time she looked into his eyes, Lily's eyes, she was confronted with the truth that she would never be extraordinary. The boy in her home represented the invitation she never received, the magical bond she could never share. This is why she shoved him into the cupboard under the stairs, why she cut his hair with cold scissors, why she insisted he remained small and invisible. If she could not banish magic from her life, she could at least shrink it, cage it, and pretend it did not overshadow her every breath. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. There is a tragic irony in Petunia's story. She spent her whole life despising magic, sneering at it, pretending it was a contamination. Yet it was precisely because she loved it once upon a time that her bitterness grew so profound. Love turned sour becomes the sharpest poison. By denying Harry any comfort, by spitting venom at the mere mention of Hogwarts, she was not only punishing him, she was punishing herself. She had to believe the world she was excluded from was ugly, ridiculous, dangerous. Only then could she justify her exclusion. Only then could she live with the unbearable truth that her sister had been chosen, and she had not. Number 14. The meeting with Dumbledore at the station. Under the blinding flash of Voldemort's curse, Harry expected nothing but darkness and silence. Instead, he found himself on the gleaming white floor of what looked like a train station, the vast arches echoing with quiet stillness. This was King's Cross, though not the version he had known when rushing toward the Hogwarts Express as a boy. Here, everything shimmered with an ethereal glow, a place both real and unreal. On that platform, Harry met Albus Dumbledore once more, and the conversation that followed carried more weight than any spell, duel, or prophecy. In the films, the confrontation with Voldemort becomes the climax, but in the pages of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, it is this spectral meeting that reveals the true heart of the story. What Harry saw first in that strange liminal space was something small and pitiful, writhing under a bench, the broken fragment of Voldemort's soul. It looked like a flayed child, unloved and abandoned, gasping but unable to die. The description is haunting, and it confronts the reader with the truth that evil, when stripped of power, is fragile and pitiful rather than grand. Rowling uses this grotesque vision to emphasize what Harry's sacrifice has done. He has carried within himself the last shard of Voldemort's soul, and by walking willingly to death, he has allowed it to be destroyed. This detail, absent in the film, underlines the cost of Harry's choices and the nature of Voldemort's cruelty. It is then that Harry realizes he is not alone. Dumbledore appears whole and radiant, no longer the frail old man bent with age but glowing with serenity. In the book, Rowling paints him with words of light. He was wearing robes of purest white, and his long silver beard gleamed more brightly than ever before. The man Harry had lost is now restored to him in a moment of ultimate need. For readers, this reunion is not simply comforting. It is the final lesson of the mentor to the student, the point at which mysteries are untangled and the truth about Harry's destiny is laid bare. The first truth Dumbledore imparts is about the Elder Wand. Harry has been wrestling with the idea of invincibility, the lure of ultimate power that drove both Voldemort and Grindelwald to destruction. Dumbledore makes clear that the wand answers not to strength, but to loyalty and humility. In the book, he tells Harry, "The true master of the Elder Wand was you, Harry, because you accepted death, not because you sought it." This single line overturns everything Voldemort believes. The Dark Lord clings to control and fears mortality, while Harry embraces sacrifice, and that acceptance becomes his strength. The movie reduces this revelation to a spectacle of exploding spells, but the book insists on a moral dimension. Equally profound is the discussion of Harry's survival. He expects to be dead, yet Dumbledore explains that his mother's sacrificial protection still lingers. When Harry allowed Voldemort to strike him in the forest, he was not throwing his life away, but extending that protection to everyone he loved. "You were the seventh Horcrux, Harry, the Horcrux he never meant to make," Dumbledore tells him. And in that instant, the boy who lived realizes that by dying willingly, he has undone the magic that tethered Voldemort's soul to his own. The revelation is not only shocking, but transformative. Harry understands he is not a pawn in some grand design, but an active agent in deciding the fate of the wizarding world. This is why the station scene is often described as the philosophical peak of the saga. It elevates the conflict beyond a battle of wands and incantations into a meditation on choice, mortality, and love. Harry has the option to board a train and move on, to pass fully into death and leave the struggle behind. But Dumbledore reminds him that he can also return, for you have a choice, Harry, you always have. In that quiet white space, the entire epic narrows down to one decision: to live or not to live. It is not fate, prophecy, or power that compels Harry. It is his own will, rooted in love for his friends and the world he hopes to protect. The contrast with Voldemort is deliberate and sharp. Voldemort fears death so profoundly that he mutilates his soul, splitting it into 7 pieces to anchor himself to life. Harry, by contrast, walks calmly into death, and in doing so becomes stronger than his enemy could ever imagine. The vision at King's Cross makes this moral divide unmissable. Rowling wants the reader to see that courage is not about defeating death with magic, but about accepting its inevitability with grace. The movies show Voldemort crumbling into ash, but only the book explains why his defeat was inevitable. He chose fear, where Harry chose love. Dumbledore himself is not portrayed as flawless in this encounter. Instead, he confesses his failings with rare humility. He admits his youthful lust for power, his obsession with the Hallows, and his shame over the death of his sister Ariana. In the book, he says with sorrow, "I was afraid of the truth, Harry. I had proven again and again that I was not to be trusted with power." This vulnerability is essential because it reveals that even the wisest figures are not free from error. For Harry, the lesson is clear. Greatness lies not in perfection, but in the courage to learn and to act with compassion despite flaws. This aspect of Dumbledore's character disappears almost entirely from the film, which prefers to present him as a distant mastermind. Number 15, Dudley's Goodbye. Of all the omissions that the Harry Potter films chose to make, few feel as deeply significant as the absence of Dudley Dursley's quiet moment of gratitude. In the movies, the Dursleys remain unchanged caricatures, Vernon snarling, Petunia frowning, Dudley sulking. They exit Harry's life in the first act of the final film as they had always been portrayed, comic villains and domestic tyrants. Yet J.K. Rowling's books gave this family a brief, startling moment of humanity. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when the Dursleys are about to be taken into hiding for their safety, Dudley reveals something unexpected. He thanks Harry. His words are halting and awkward, but they cut through years of cruelty with surprising sincerity. "I don't think you're a waste of space." It is hard to overstate how shocking this moment is for both Harry and the reader. Throughout his childhood, Harry lived as the unwanted boy in the cupboard under the stairs, treated as a burden and a nuisance by Vernon and Petunia. Dudley was the cruel enforcer of that mistreatment, mocking Harry, punching him, and leading a group of bullies against him. For a decade, Harry's cousin epitomized the spoiled child of privilege, while Harry endured neglect and abuse. The idea that Dudley could see Harry as anything other than a target feels unimaginable. And yet Rowling crafts this reversal with deliberate subtlety. Dudley's gratitude is not expressed in grand language. It is awkward, clumsy, and brief. But it is precisely this imperfection that makes it believable. The power of this passage lies in its timing. At the start of Deathly Hallows, Harry is 17, on the cusp of leaving behind the world of his childhood. The war against Voldemort has consumed Wizarding Britain, and the Ministry of Magic has fallen. Dumbledore is dead, and danger surrounds Harry from every side. When the Order of the Phoenix arrives to escort Harry away from Privet Drive for the last time, it is not only Harry's departure from his childhood home, but also the Dursleys' exit from his life. They are about to vanish into protective custody, unlikely ever to see Harry again. This is a moment of finality. It is a last chance for any reckoning, for any word that might close the book on their shared history. And in that moment, Rowling allows Dudley to grow. The words themselves are carefully chosen. "I don't think you're a waste of space" is hardly the soaring tribute one might expect in a tale of reconciliation. But this understatement makes it all the more poignant. Dudley is not suddenly eloquent. He cannot erase the years of cruelty. Instead, he manages to push out the smallest, simplest acknowledgement of Harry's worth, and because it comes from Dudley, it lands with enormous weight. Rowling resists the temptation to sentimentalize. She gives us just enough to suggest that Dudley, in his own limited way, has been changed by Harry's presence. The boy who once delighted in tormenting his cousin now recognizes that Harry matters. For Harry, the effect is disorienting. In the book, Rowling notes Harry's surprise. Harry was left speechless. It was so out of character for Dudley to say anything remotely like that. After years of being told he was nothing, of being treated as an unwelcome intruder in his own home, this sudden shift rattles him. Dudley's words are not just a goodbye, they are a dismantling of the old dynamic that had defined their relationship. For the first time, Harry sees his cousin not as a tormentor, but as a young man capable of change. And in that recognition lies one of the quiet victories of Rowling's narrative. Even the most unlikable characters can find moments of grace. The films, however, erase this scene entirely. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 1, the Dursleys pack up their belongings and drive away without a word. Dudley remains the same sullen presence he had always been on screen. No gratitude, no recognition, no shift in perspective. To a viewer who only knows the films, the Dursleys are simply abandoned as a gaggle of irredeemable bullies. Their story arc ends flatly, without resolution. The omission might seem small compared to the epic battles and magical duels that dominate the final installments, but it represents a lost opportunity. It denies audiences one of the series' few glimpses of reconciliation, one that speaks to Rowling's broader themes of redemption and transformation. Why does this matter? Because the heart of Harry Potter has always been about more than spells and battles. It is about choice, about the possibility of growth, and about the capacity for people to change. Dudley's moment embodies this. Raised in an environment of prejudice, spoiled by his parents' indulgence, and conditioned to despise Harry, Dudley seemed doomed to cruelty. Yet with time and maturity, he manages to resist that mold. He recognizes Harry not as a rival or a nuisance, but as someone who saved his life. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry protected Dudley from the Dementors. That experience, terrifying as it was, forced Dudley to confront realities beyond his sheltered world. It planted a seed of respect, one that would only surface years later in that final goodbye. There is also something deeply symbolic in Dudley's words. Waste of space echoes the language that Vernon and Petunia implicitly taught him. For years, Harry's very existence was treated as a mistake, an accident forced upon them. Dudley, parroting that worldview, had always been part of his identity. By rejecting it, by explicitly saying Harry is not a waste, Dudley severs himself from his parents' cruelty. He does not disown them, but he takes his first step toward independent thought. In a series obsessed with cycles of inheritance and breaking free from the sins of the past, this tiny act of rebellion is crucial. It suggests that even within toxic families, change is possible. The tragedy of the film adaptation is that it robs viewers of this complexity. Without Dudley's gratitude, the Dursleys remain static figures. They are comedic relief, convenient foils to highlight Harry's suffering, but nothing more. The books, however, refuse to let them off so easily. Rowling insists on nuance. She shows that even in this unpleasant family, there can be moments of vulnerability and growth. Dudley's farewell is not just about him and Harry. It is about the larger message that empathy can emerge from the unlikeliest places. Fans who know the books often lament this missing scene, and for good reason. In interviews, Rowling herself admitted that she was particularly fond of this exchange. It was not about making the Dursleys likable. It was about giving Dudley a fragment of humanity, a sign that Harry's presence in his life left a mark. Without it, the films present a world in which enemies remain enemies and bullies remain bullies. With it, the books remind us that even the most flawed characters can surprise us. There is also an emotional weight to this farewell that resonates beyond the page. For readers who grew up with Harry, Dudley's shift mirrors the process of growing older and recognizing that people are rarely as simple as they seem. The bully on the playground might one day apologize. The cruel cousin might find a way to express gratitude. These moments do not erase the pain of the past, but they complicate it. They remind us that people evolve, sometimes in quiet and unexpected ways. Rowling captures this with a single, awkward sentence from a character long dismissed as shallow. In literary terms, this is a payoff years in the making. From the very first book, Dudley was painted as Harry's domestic antagonist. His tantrums, his endless presence, his violent outbursts, all set against Harry's deprivation, made him an easy symbol of injustice. To end the series without challenging that dynamic would have been narratively unsatisfying. Instead, Rowling offers a resolution that is understated yet powerful. Dudley does not become Harry's friend. He does not apologize for years of cruelty, but he takes one step forward, enough to suggest that the story of their relationship is not one of permanent hatred. It is one of painful beginnings and tentative growth. When Harry watches the Dursleys leave in the book, the moment lingers because it is so ordinary. There are no spells, no wands, no magical creatures, just a boy and his cousin saying goodbye in halting words. In a series filled with dragons, giants, and enchanted castles, this quiet scene stands out precisely because of its realism. It shows that the true magic of Harry Potter lies not only in fantasy, but in the emotional truths hidden within its characters. Dudley's farewell is proof that even the smallest sentences can carry the weight of entire histories. Ultimately, the absence of this scene in the films leaves a gap that fans continue to feel. It strips away a layer of emotional depth, flattening Dudley back into the role of a cartoonish bully. But in the pages of the book, the moment endures, a reminder of Rowling's insistence that even the most unlikely characters are capable of change. For those who read the story closely, Dudley's clumsy gratitude remains one of the series' most surprising and moving revelations, a quiet reminder that redemption can appear in the most unexpected of places. Number 16. Lavender Brown's story. Lavender Brown was never meant to be the shining star of the Harry Potter saga, and yet her presence in the 6th book and film places her at the very heart of one of the story's most emotionally charged subplots. On screen, she is often remembered for her playful giggles, the cloying nickname One-One, and her exaggerated jealousy of Hermione Granger. This made her a figure of comic relief, an obstacle in the awkward budding romance between Ron and Hermione. But in the novels written by J.K. Rowling, Lavender's story goes beyond humour. Her role transforms from a light-hearted distraction into a tragic example of how war spares no one, even characters who once seemed merely secondary. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Lavender is portrayed as a typical teenage girl, swept away by infatuation. She is the first person to openly kiss Ron Weasley after his Quidditch victory, creating a storm of tension in the trio. The film lingers on her clinginess, presenting her as almost ridiculous in her devotion. Yet when we shift to the book, Lavender is not just a comic presence. She is a young witch experiencing her first romance, navigating the fragile emotions of love and jealousy. The laughter she brings the reader is real, but it is underscored by the knowledge that Hogwarts is no longer safe, and her youthful dreams will soon collide with the harsh realities of Voldemort's war. By the time we arrive at Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the mood has shifted entirely. The final battle begins, and Lavender becomes a casualty. On the page, her fate is laid bare in shocking clarity. Rowling writes, 2 bodies fell from the balcony overhead. A grey blur that Harry took for an animal sped 4-legged across the hall to sink its teeth into one of the fallen. The animal is Fenrir Greyback, the notorious werewolf known for targeting children and students. The body beneath him is Lavender Brown. In those lines, Lavender's story is forever changed. She is no longer a schoolgirl chasing romance. She is another victim of the brutality of war. The description continues with vivid horror. Harry sees Professor Trelawney hurling crystal balls down at the attackers, and in the chaos he glimpses Lavender motionless, blood pooling beneath her. It is a stark reminder of Rowling's ability to take a character once treated as frivolous and suddenly strip away every ounce of humour. Lavender's wound is not portrayed as a scratch or an injury she might recover from. The words suggest finality. Many readers accept that Lavender died at that moment, even if her death was never announced as clearly as Fred Weasley's or Remus Lupin's. Her last appearance is drenched in violence, and it shocks because we knew her not as a soldier, but as a teenager who once giggled in the Gryffindor common room. The contrast between the book and the film adaptation is striking. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, Lavender is indeed attacked by Fenrir Greyback during the Battle of Hogwarts. We see her fall from the balcony and Greyback lunge at her throat. Yet in the cinematic version, she is rescued in time as Hermione and Professor Trelawney drive the werewolf away. Lavender is shown lying on the floor, gravely injured but not confirmed dead. Moments later, the story moves on without explanation, leaving her fate unresolved. To the uninitiated moviegoer, Lavender might have survived. Her tragedy is muted, and with it, the weight of another life lost in the war is erased. Why does this matter? Because Lavender's fate carries symbolic power. In the book, she represents all those young witches and wizards who were not great heroes, not central to the grand prophecy, but still paid with their lives. She was not a chosen one, not part of Dumbledore's army's inner circle, not even universally admired. And yet the war came for her. Fenrir Greyback's attack is not only random violence, but also an embodiment of Voldemort's world, where cruelty is arbitrary and no one is safe. Lavender's death, tragic and unnecessary, shows readers the true cost of battle. By softening or ignoring her fate, the film sacrifices this haunting lesson. Readers often debate whether Lavender officially died, since Rowling leaves the moment ambiguous. Some cling to hope that she survived, citing that the books do not explicitly declare her dead. But the details are grim. She was feebly stirring, then, with a great spurt of blood, she fell back, motionless. Those words do not invite optimism. Even if she lingered briefly, the suggestion is that Lavender did not walk away from the battlefield. To believe otherwise would be to deny the cruelty that defined Greyback's character. His role throughout the saga was to scar and kill, and Lavender's attack fulfills that arc. When examining why the filmmakers chose not to confirm Lavender's death, one might consider the challenges of tone. The films often wrestled with balancing darkness with accessibility for younger audiences. Lavender's grisly end, graphically described in the book, may have seemed too brutal for screen. But by leaving her fate uncertain, the movie also stripped the Battle of Hogwarts of one of its smaller, yet deeply human tragedies. Her death was not about spectacle, it was about reminding us that behind the statistics of war were names and faces, people with lives and stories. Lavender's absence from the tally of the fallen blunts this emotional impact. There is also the matter of Ron Weasley's character. Lavender's death carries quiet consequences for him as well. Though their romance ended poorly, Ron had once been the center of her affection. In the chaos of battle, to see a former girlfriend mauled by Greyback adds another layer to his emotional burden. The films, by leaving Lavender's outcome vague, avoid forcing Ron to grapple with that painful moment. But in the books, even if Rowling does not linger on Ron's reaction, the mere knowledge of Lavender's probable death contributes to the growing pile of losses suffered by the Gryffindors. In literary terms, Lavender's arc follows a classic trajectory. She begins as a character of innocence and levity, only to be consumed by the cruelty of war. This transformation is what gives her story weight. It would be easy to dismiss her as a side character with little purpose, yet Rowling weaves her into the narrative in a way that reminds us how even the seemingly minor figures carry significance. Her presence in the 6th book is light-hearted. Her exit in the 7th is tragic. In that way, she mirrors the entire tonal journey of the series itself, from whimsical school adventures to the grim struggle for survival. The absence of her confirmed death in the film also alters the way viewers interpret the Battle of Hogwarts. In the book, the list of casualties feels endless. Fred Weasley, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, Colin Creevey, and Lavender Brown, among others. Each loss deepens the sense of devastation. In the movie, with Lavender's fate left uncertain, the list is shorter, the devastation lighter. It reduces the weight of the victory, making it feel cleaner, less stained by the blood of the young and innocent. But Rowling's vision was never meant to be clean. The price of victory was meant to be unbearable. It is worth recalling that Lavender was also tied to another prophecy of sorts. She was a favourite student of Professor Trelawney, and her faith in divination became a running joke among her classmates. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, she wept when Trelawney's prediction about her rabbit, Winky, came true. Lavender believed deeply in omens and signs. That same Lavender, who once mourned a pet, is the girl who later becomes prey to one of the most feared predators in the wizarding world. The irony is painful. Trelawney's obsession with predicting death ultimately circles back to claim one of her own most devoted students. Some readers have argued that Lavender's story, though tragic, was necessary. In war, not every death is noble or heroic. Some are sudden, unfair, and cruel. Lavender was not fighting heroically on the front lines. She fell from a balcony and was torn apart by a monster. This randomness is what makes her fate so heartbreaking. She did not die defending a great cause. She died because war is merciless. In this way, Rowling forced readers to acknowledge that not every loss would be as meaningful as Dumbledore's or as celebrated as Fred's. Some losses are quieter, forgotten, yet no less real. Lavender Brown, therefore, stands as one of the series' most overlooked tragedies. She is remembered by film audiences mostly for her silly romance with Ron, while book readers carry the memory of her final bloody fall. The difference between these portrayals is more than a cinematic choice. It is the difference between acknowledging the true cost of war and brushing it aside. Lavender's story asks us not to forget the names that appear only briefly, the students whose laughter once filled the halls of Hogwarts, but whose voices were silenced before the dawn of peace. Number 17, The Fate of Lupin and Tonks. Of all the omissions the Harry Potter films made, none feels quite as tragic as the treatment of Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks. Their love story, their marriage, their struggles, and their sacrifice were compressed into fleeting glimpses on screen, leaving audiences with little more than a passing image of their bodies in the Great Hall after the Battle of Hogwarts. Yet in the books, their journey is one of the most powerful and heartbreaking arcs, full of conflict, growth, and symbolism that ties directly to Harry's own fate. To ignore it is to lose one of the series' most poignant parallels, where history repeats itself and a child is left behind by war. Lupin's hesitation to marry Tonks reveals the heart of his character, a man consumed by self-doubt and shame. He carried the curse of lycanthropy like a permanent scar, believing himself unworthy of love or family. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, he tells Harry, "Sometimes you remind me a lot of James. He called it my furry little problem in company. Many people were less kind." This mixture of humour and bitterness defined Lupin's life. When Tonks confessed her love for him, he recoiled, convinced that by accepting her affection he would be condemning her to a life of scorn and fear. The films skipped over this inner torment, but Rowling's text shows the depth of Lupin's struggle and makes their eventual marriage far more powerful. Tonks herself is a figure of defiance and resilience. Younger than Lupin, full of energy and loyalty, she refused to let his fears dictate her choices. In Half-Blood Prince, her appearance, dull hair, and a drained face served as a visual symbol of her heartbreak, while Lupin tried to push her away. Rowling describes her as looking thinner and paler than usual, her hair lank and unkempt. It was her love for Lupin that broke through his resistance, and in defying his pessimism, she embodied one of the central themes of the series, the power of love against fear. The movies stripped away this complexity, presenting their relationship as an afterthought, when in truth it was one of the most meaningful romances in the saga. By the time Deathly Hallows begins, Lupin and Tonks are married, though not without turbulence. Lupin's fears had not vanished, and his anxieties deepened when Tonks became pregnant. In one of the most intense and emotionally raw moments of the series, Lupin visits Harry, Ron, and Hermione at Grimmauld Place. He offers to join them on their dangerous quest, abandoning his wife and unborn child. Harry explodes in fury, calling him a coward. Rowling captures Harry's words. "Sometimes you remind me a lot of James. You would have stayed with your family. You would have stayed with your son." This confrontation is crucial, for it forces Lupin to face his own demons. The films eliminated this encounter, leaving Lupin's growth incomplete. The scene shows how Harry, barely more than a boy, holds Lupin accountable and pushes him toward the courage he needed to embrace fatherhood. Lupin does not just represent personal tragedy, he is also a symbol of prejudice. As a werewolf, he endured social rejection, discrimination, and a sense of perpetual isolation. His story is a mirror to countless historical realities where entire groups were stigmatized for conditions beyond their control. Marrying Tonks was not just an act of love, it was a rebellion against a society that told him he did not deserve happiness. Their child, Teddy Lupin, becomes a symbol of hope, a life born out of war, stigma, and resilience. But without the details, film viewers could never appreciate the weight of this arc. The birth of Teddy is described with quiet tenderness in the books, yet it is one of the most profound additions to the narrative. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry hears the news, he becomes godfather, echoing the role Sirius Black once played for him. Lupin, humbled and grateful, tells Harry, "I am sorry I made a fool of myself in your sitting room. I was wrong, terribly wrong, to want to run from my child. It is a moment of redemption." Lupin accepts his responsibility, embraces his role as a father, and acknowledges that love requires not escape, but commitment. This moment never reaches the screen, leaving casual audiences unaware of the emotional weight behind Lupin's decisions. The tragedy strikes in the Battle of Hogwarts, where Lupin and Tonks both fall. In the book, Harry sees their bodies side by side in the Great Hall. Rowling's description is stark. Lupin, lying behind Fred, looked peaceful, sunk in sleep, his hand still clutching his wand. Tonks, pale, her eyes wide and empty, lay beside him. The deliberate choice to place them together like a couple reunited in death adds a haunting beauty to the horror of war. The films presented their deaths with no build-up, no aftermath, only a brief glimpse that reduced the magnitude of their sacrifice to a background detail. Readers, however, felt the loss deeply because they had been taken through the full arc of fear, love, marriage, and parenthood. What makes their deaths even more devastating is the parallel to Harry's own story. Just as Lily and James Potter died in the First War against Voldemort, leaving their son an orphan, Lupin and Tonks fall in the Second War, leaving Teddy behind. The cycle repeats. Rowling deliberately draws this parallel, showing how war leaves scars that echo across generations. It is not just about Harry's survival, but about how others are forced to bear the same burden he once carried. This symmetry deepens the thematic resonance of the series, but without the proper attention on screen, the audience is robbed of the full impact. Tonks's presence in the story should not be overlooked either. She represented youth, vibrancy, and an unshakable commitment to fight for good. She could have stayed safe with her child, yet she chose to return to Hogwarts to fight alongside her husband. This decision is heartbreaking because it shows the impossible choices war forces upon people: fight for the future or stay behind to preserve it. Her determination to stand by Lupin until the end makes her death all the more crushing. It is love expressed not through survival, but through solidarity in battle. The films, in their attempt to streamline, robbed Lupin and Tonks of their humanity. We see them holding hands briefly, we hear that they had a son, and then they vanish into the chaos of war, but the books reveal an entire emotional landscape. Lupin's journey from self-loathing to acceptance, Tonks's unwavering loyalty, The confrontation with Harry, the birth of Teddy, and the ultimate sacrifice, they all serve to create one of the richest subplots in the series. By ignoring it, the films created a gap that only readers could fill. One cannot underestimate the importance of Lupin's redemption arc. He began as a teacher burdened by secrecy, hiding his condition, and ended as a husband and father who found enough courage to live for others. His journey is not one of defeating monsters, but of conquering his own fears. In his death, there is peace, but also a sense of unfinished business. Teddy will never know his parents, just as Harry never knew his own. Yet the presence of Harry as godfather suggests that the cycle may break, that Teddy will not be entirely alone. It is a subtle yet profound promise that the love Harry once received from others, he will now extend to another orphan of war. Lupin's and Tonks' story also shows how secondary characters can embody the grand themes of the series. The fight against Voldemort was not just Harry's battle, it was a struggle fought by many who paid the ultimate price. By weaving their personal lives into the larger war, Rowling reminds us that behind every victory are countless sacrifices. Lupin and Tonks are not just side characters who fell in battle, they are emblems of love, fear, and resilience, whose absence is deeply felt. The stark reality is that Lupin and Tonks deserved better in the cinematic adaptations. Their story was not filler, it was a microcosm of the saga itself, a love tested by fear, a family torn apart by war, and a child left behind to carry their memory. When readers close the final book, the image of their bodies in the Great Hall lingers, not because of spectacle, but because of the quiet devastation it represents. It is the silence after the storm, where even victory cannot erase the price paid. The films gave us a war, the books gave us the lives within it. That is why the loss of Lupin and Tonks strikes so deeply in the written word and feels so hollow on the screen. Their arc was never about their deaths alone, but about everything that led to them, their doubts, their love, their courage, and their final act of sacrifice. To understand Harry Potter fully is to remember that while the boy who lived survived, many others did not, and among the most haunting of those losses are Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks. Number 18, Dumbledore's Collection. The office of Albus Dumbledore in the films always felt like a stage set rather than a true chamber of secrets. The audience was shown a high-ceilinged room with a few scattered bookshelves, the ever-present forks perched loyally, and some twinkling silver instruments that hummed quietly in the background. Yet for those who have read the books carefully, the descriptions paint a far richer picture. Dumbledore's study was not only an office, but also a laboratory, a museum, and a treasury of magical wonders collected across decades of his life. Rowling gives us glimpses of shelves filled with odd instruments, mysterious boxes, and enchanted items whose purpose was never fully explained. This collection, rarely mentioned in the films, is a key to understanding the hidden depths of the headmaster of Hogwarts. When Harry first entered Dumbledore's office in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Rowling writes that he noticed many curious silver instruments stood on spindle-legged tables, whirring and emitting little puffs of smoke. These words are far from decorative. They suggest that Dumbledore surrounded himself with experimental devices, perhaps of his own invention. The idea that these instruments measured things invisible to ordinary eyes gives us a sense of his constant investigation into mysteries of magic. The films reduced these to vague props, leaving out the unsettling feeling that each device was both alive and incomprehensible, a reminder that Dumbledore worked on a level far beyond other wizards. One of the most intriguing pieces is the set of delicate silver instruments that Harry later sees destroyed by Voldemort in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. After Voldemort possesses Harry in the Ministry of Magic, Dumbledore uses these instruments to monitor Harry's state. Rowling writes, instrument on the spindle-legged table whirred into life with a little click, emitted a puff of smoke, and a miniature figure of a man appeared. This description reveals how Dumbledore used his inventions as tools for divination and diagnosis, They were not mere curiosities, but working magical technology, proof that Dumbledore was as much an inventor as a leader. The films ignore this vital detail, erasing the sense that the headmaster was also an alchemist, a craftsman of arcane tools. Then there were the mysterious silver boxes humming softly in the background, sometimes opening themselves with odd clicks. In Half-Blood Prince, Harry notices a number of curious-looking instruments, including a silver box that was emitting a rhythmic ticking noise, rather like a heart. What was inside this box? Rowling never explains. Some readers believe it was a container for storing memories, a precursor to the pensieve. Others suggest it measured the strength of enchantments, or perhaps it held a cursed object that Dumbledore studied in secret. The omission of such details in the films meant that Dumbledore's study lost its aura of dangerous research. Instead of a place where the mysteries of life and death were probed, it became a neat Victorian-style room with decorative ornaments. Even more overlooked are the fragments of jewellery and stones described in the books. Rowling gives us a vision of strange rings, shining crystals, and carved gems lying among the headmaster's possessions. These could have been harmless trinkets, but Dumbledore's history suggests otherwise. After all, he was the one who sought the Deathly Hallows, who claimed the Elder Wand, and who studied the Resurrection Stone. It is entirely possible that the odd stones scattered across his office were connected to these obsessions. When Harry describes a little golden instrument resembling a tiny planetarium and a ring with a cracked black stone, readers cannot help but connect these objects to the Hallows themselves. The Wald. Films, however, stripped this symbolism, showing us only generic curios that held no secrets. There is also the unforgettable moment in Order of the Phoenix, when one of Dumbledore's instruments begins to emit a strange song. Rowling writes, "One of the silver instruments whirred into life, little puffs of smoke rose from it, and at last it began to emit a soft, plaintive wail. This sound, eerie and almost alive, demonstrates that Dumbledore's devices were not mechanical, but magical organisms. They reacted to emotions, to magical currents, to the presence of Voldemort in Harry's mind. To witness these instruments was to realize that Dumbledore had crafted a collection that could almost feel the pulse of the world. The films, which chose silence and minimalism, erased this atmosphere of living magic. Dumbledore's possession of the pensieve is itself a testament to his role as a collector of rare magical artifacts. The pensieve is described in Goblet of Fire as a shallow stone basin in which an odd silvery substance was swirling. It is a tool of memory and time, allowing a wizard to step outside of linear experience. The films showed this object, but as a practical storytelling device rather than as part of Dumbledore's greater collection. What was left unsaid is that the pensieve was likely only one of many experimental vessels of thought that Dumbledore owned. The silver boxes, the singing instruments, the glowing crystals, all could have been part of the same exploration of memory, prophecy, and destiny. This unified vision of Dumbledore as the master of time and knowledge never reached the screen. Consider also the implication of Dumbledore's long history with alchemy. He was, after all, the partner of Nicholas Flamel, the famous alchemist credited with creating the Philosopher's Stone. If Dumbledore studied with Flamel, then many of the items in his office might have been alchemical tools, remnants of experiments in transmutation and immortality. The films give us no glimpse of this heritage, yet in the books the sense that Dumbledore's office was a laboratory resonates in every description. The silvery globes that rotated like planets may have been models of alchemical processes, the boxes may have held volatile elements, and the rings could have been talismans infused with protective spells. Harry himself often reacted with awe and confusion in this chamber. Rowling emphasizes his uncertainty, describing how he could make neither head nor tail of the strange devices whirring and puffing gently on spindle-legged tables. This is not the response of a boy to a simple office, but to a workshop filled with living enigmas. By softening these details, the films denied the viewer the experience of sharing Harry's bewilderment, of standing before mysteries too great to name. It was not just Dumbledore who was enigmatic, but the very space he inhabited, a chamber where secrets breathed. Some of the items in Dumbledore's office may even connect to darker themes. The cracked black stone mentioned in passing is often theorized by fans to be the resurrection stone itself before it was set into the Peveril ring. If this is true, then Dumbledore's office was not only a museum of wonders, but a repository of curses and dangerous relics. His decision to keep such items close to him shows both his arrogance and his responsibility. He was the guardian of forbidden things, a role that could have been more vividly portrayed in film, but was softened into the image of a kindly grandfather with twinkling eyes. One of the most evocative descriptions comes in Order of the Phoenix, when after the battle in the Department of Mysteries, Dumbledore's instruments are shown destroyed. Rowling writes that the little whirring silver instrument on the spindle-legged table had stopped working and lay smoking gently. This moment of ruin symbolized not only the damage done by Voldemort, but the fragility of Dumbledore's research. His magical instruments, once mysterious and strong, could be shattered like glass. The films ignored this dramatic image, losing a chance to show the vulnerability of the headmaster's intellectual world. The absence of these details in the films created a gap in the portrayal of Dumbledore's character. Readers knew him as a wizard, deeply invested in experimentation, surrounded by magical creations that defied explanation. Viewers, however, saw only a man in an elegant room. The office on screen never hinted at the danger, the brilliance, or the obsessive curiosity that the books revealed. Instead of a chamber of enigmas, it was reduced to a backdrop, a place for conversations rather than revelations. One cannot help but imagine how the cinematic versions could have shown this world. The silver boxes pulsing like hearts, the strange smoke rising into shapes, the cracked stone glimmering ominously, these details would have enriched the films with a sense of wonder and dread. They would have reminded the audience that Dumbledore's wisdom came not only from books, but from years of crafting, collecting, and guarding objects that touched upon life, death, and eternity. Without them, much of his mystery was lost. Dumbledore's collection was more than decoration. It was an extension of his mind. Each object reflected a question he pursued, a danger he confronted, or a hope he nurtured. To erase them is to erase part of his story. The books allow us to glimpse this hidden gallery of magic, where silver sang, boxes pulsed, and stones whispered of ancient secrets. The films gave us only silence. For those who seek the full truth of Dumbledore, it lies not in the cinema, but in the pages where his office becomes a living map of his soul. Number 19, The Funeral of Dumbledore. In the sixth Harry Potter film, the moment of Albus Dumbledore's death ends in an image of silence and grief. Students and professors gather in the courtyard, lift their wands and cast away the mark of the Dark Lord in a single burst of glowing light. It is powerful, cinematic, and moving, but it is only a fragment of what J.K. Rowling wrote in the book. The novel gives us something far grander, something that resonates like an echo across the magical world, the one and only funeral ever held at Hogwarts. The omission of this monumental scene in the movie is more than just a missing chapter. It strips away the communal weight of loss, leaving behind a memory far smaller than it was meant to be. The funeral of Albus Dumbledore, as described in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, is a vision of unity and sorrow unlike anything seen before. Hogwarts, a castle accustomed to the noise of young witches and wizards, became the setting for a spectacle of mourning that extended beyond its stone walls. Rowling's words place the reader among a vast gathering: students, professors, ministry officials, magical creatures, and foreign guests. It was the first and last time that the grounds of Hogwarts were the stage of a funeral, she writes, underscoring its historic importance. The weight of the moment is amplified by the diversity of attendees, from Firenze, the centaur standing with dignity at the edge of the forest, to the giants looming above the crowd in solemn respect. Such images cannot be reduced to a single cinematic gesture of raised wands without losing their depth. What made the funeral unforgettable in the book was not only the breadth of the gathering, but the detail Rowling gave to the proceedings. The coffin itself was described as being of shining white marble, a tomb conjured by magic on the shores of the Black Lake. The choice of location was not random. The lake had long been part of Dumbledore's world, reflecting the sunlight and shadows of his life at Hogwarts. The scene was solemn yet radiant, echoing the paradox that defined Dumbledore, a wizard of immense power who carried sorrow and secrets in equal measure. By placing him by the water, Rowling allowed nature itself to participate in the farewell, a mirror to his reflective and enigmatic spirit. The book also allows us to feel Harry's grief in a way the film never quite manages. His emotions are described with painful clarity. The sense of emptiness, the inability to accept that the man who had guided him through danger after danger was now gone. In Rowling's words, he felt as though an iron fist had clenched around his heart. The raising of wands in the film is symbolic, but it does not give us this raw interiority. In the book, Harry notices every detail: the crows circling above, the stillness of the forbidden forest, and the sobs of the people around him. He is not just one boy among many. He is the heir to Dumbledore's mission, forced to carry the unbearable burden of continuation. Among the mourners, certain presences stand out and add layers of meaning. The centaurs, who had long kept their distance from wizarding affairs, appeared silently to honour Dumbledore, acknowledging that he had been one of the rare humans who treated them with respect. The giants, brought there by Hagrid's efforts, embodied another of Dumbledore's life's work, his tireless attempts to bring together communities that others feared or dismissed. Their massive figures, bowed in mourning, told of the bridges he had built, where others saw only divisions. The inclusion of ghosts like Nearly Headless Nick and the rest of the Hogwarts spirits added another dimension, reminding us that even the dead paid homage to the man who had given them a voice in the castle. Kingsley Shacklebolt and other ministry officials were also present, though the political tension was palpable. At that point in the story, the ministry was under the creeping influence of fear and denial, yet even its most reluctant members recognized that the loss of Dumbledore was a loss for all wizard kind. The gathering, therefore, was not only personal, but political. It was a stage where old grudges and alliances faded for a day under the shadow of collective grief. There was not a person in that place who did not feel that they had lost someone of immense importance, Rowling writes, and the sentence rings with the truth of the moment. The detail that many readers never forgot was the silence broken by the merpeople of the lake. As the coffin was lowered, their song rose up from the water, an unearthly lament that carried across the grounds. It was not words, but a music that seemed older than the castle itself, the voice of another world grieving a man who had defended them. The merfolk had never taken part in wizard gatherings, yet here they were, their keening cries joining human voices. It made the funeral into something mythic, a fusion of all beings who had once crossed paths with Dumbledore. The film erases this haunting note, depriving the story of its most ethereal moment. Even Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, participated in this final farewell in a way that echoed legend. In the book, the phoenix's song is described as a lament, a sound of such beauty that it pierced the soul. White-hot pain and a great weight of loss filled those who heard it, Rowling tells us, and it was as though the bird itself was burning away in grief. When Fawkes disappears, it is understood that the bond between Master and Phoenix is broken, a symbol that Dumbledore's era has truly ended. The absence of Fawkes's lament in the film is perhaps the most striking omission, because it was a sound that defined Dumbledore's life and legacy. The symbolic layers of the funeral went beyond emotion and spectacle. This was the one time Hogwarts was transformed into a place not of learning or battle, but of collective remembrance. The castle became a sanctuary for memory, its walls bearing witness to something timeless. It was the uniting of all magical beings in acknowledgement of one man's contribution, and it became clear that Dumbledore was not simply the headmaster of a school, but the guardian of a world. The students' raised wands in the film give us a glimpse of unity, but the full vision of the book shows us how vast that unity was, stretching across species, politics, and even life and death. Rowling's choice to detail this event so fully was deliberate. Dumbledore's life had been filled with contradictions, his youthful friendship with Gellert Grindelwald, his burden of secrets, his brilliance tinged with regret. His funeral was not a simple farewell, but a statement of what he meant to everyone, despite his flaws. In the presence of the centaurs, giants, merpeople, ghosts, and humans, one could see the shape of a wizard who had tried, however imperfectly, to weave together the fragments of a fractured world. To strip away this vision in the film was to reduce Dumbledore's death to a personal loss, when in truth it was a loss for all. The ceremony also provided a clear moment of transition for Harry. Standing at the edge of the lake, listening to the voices of mourning, Harry resolved to continue the task that had been left to him. There was no returning to his childhood, Rowling implies. He had crossed into the realm of responsibility, marked by the realization that even the strongest figures fall. The film captures Harry's grief in brief, but it does not allow the audience to experience this threshold moment where sorrow becomes determination. Without the funeral, the connection between Dumbledore's death and Harry's mission feels thinner, less inevitable. For readers, the funeral was also an echo of myth. It had the grandeur of the funeral pyres of kings, the solemnity of ancient rites, and the universality of communal lament. The raised wands in the film nod to that, but they cannot replace the imagery of white marble gleaming by the lake, the phoenix's song fading into the sky, or the merfolk's cries vibrating through the water. Rowling gave Dumbledore an ending worthy of legend, and she allowed the reader to be present at that mythic moment. The film, by contrast, left the audience watching from a distance, never fully stepping into that shared grief. One can only imagine how powerful it would have been to see giants and centaurs standing shoulder to shoulder, merfolk breaking the surface of the water, and the phoenix's final lament echoing through the valley. Such a vision would not only have honoured Dumbledore, but also given the viewers a sense of the magical world's scale and complexity. Instead, the adaptation offered a beautiful but simplified version, a snapshot instead of a panorama. What was lost was not only spectacle but meaning, the understanding that Dumbledore's life had touched every corner of the magical universe. In the end, the absence of Dumbledore's funeral in the film adaptation leaves a void. The cinematic gesture of raised wands remains memorable, yet it cannot convey the enormity of loss and the breadth of unity that Rowling crafted in the book. The funeral was not just a farewell to a character, but a rare moment when the magical world revealed its deepest interconnectedness. It was the point where grief became history, where sorrow became myth. Without it, the film passes quickly over the greatest of transitions, and the audience never feels the full gravity of what has been lost. Number 20, Draco Malfoy's past. Draco Malfoy enters the films as the archetypal spoiled antagonist, sneering at Harry Potter on their very first meeting in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. In the movies, this dynamic rarely deepens. Draco remains a pale, sharp-featured reminder of schoolyard cruelty, a foil to Harry's courage. Yet in the books, especially from the 6th installment onward, the surface begins to crack. J.K. Rowling peels away layers of arrogance to reveal a frightened boy trapped in circumstances larger than himself. The film adaptations only briefly touch upon this, but the pages of the novel expose Draco's descent into despair, and they reveal the terrible burden placed on his shoulders by Voldemort himself. By the time we reach Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the Malfoy family has fallen into disgrace. Lucius Malfoy, once a proud Death Eater and a favourite in Voldemort's ranks, has failed disastrously at the Ministry of Magic. He is imprisoned in Azkaban, leaving his wife Narcissa desperate and afraid. To punish Lucius, Voldemort does not simply humiliate him, he targets the sun. Draco, still only 16, is given the impossible task of murdering Albus Dumbledore. On the surface this appears to be an honour, but in truth it is a death sentence cloaked as a mission. As Rowling writes, it was a punishment, a death sentence designed for Draco himself. If he failed, Voldemort would kill him. Half-Blood Prince, Chapter 15. This is the turning point where Draco ceases to be just a school bully and becomes a tragic figure. The films simplify this transformation, presenting Draco's mission almost as though he is just another villain acting on dark orders. But the book's portrayal is hauntingly different. Rowling depicts Draco as cornered prey, constantly under surveillance, knowing that failure means not only his own death but also the death of Narcissa and possibly even Lucius in prison. The Malfoy name, once synonymous with aristocratic pride, has become a curse. Draco is burdened with carrying the sins of his father, and for the first time in the series, the reader can see him without his polished armour of superiority. He is fragile, even trembling behind closed doors. One of the most striking images from the book that never made it into the film is Draco weeping in the boys' bathroom, staring into the mirror with blood on his hands after a duel with Harry. This is not the Draco of cinema, who always seems cold and collected. Instead, this is a child coming undone, terrified by what he is being forced to become. Rowling describes it vividly. Draco was crying, his face a mixture of fear and fury, his pale hands clutching the sides of the sink. Half-Blood Prince, Chapter 24. Harry's use of Sectum Sempra, leaving Draco bleeding, only reinforces the fragility of his situation. He is not a hardened Death Eater, he is a boy who has been set up to fail. The bathroom scene is crucial because it exposes the real stakes of Draco's story. He is no longer an opponent on the Quidditch pitch or a sneering presence in potions class. He is now a teenager, torn between survival and morality. The task Voldemort has given him is not just cruel, it is designed to break him. Narcissa knows this, which is why she begs Severus Snape in a desperate midnight visit to Spinner's End to protect Draco. The famous unbreakable vow, where Snape swears to carry out Draco's task if Draco fails, underscores how little chance Voldemort ever intended to give the boy. The mission is meant as punishment, not opportunity. In the book, Narcissa's desperation is palpable. He intends to kill my son. I will not let this happen. Half-Blood Prince, Chapter 2. This scene exists in the movie but lacks the same emotional weight. On the page, the terror of a mother fighting for her son is unforgettable. The tension continues to build inside Hogwarts. Draco is no longer the loud, arrogant leader of Slytherin. Instead, he becomes a shadow, isolated and consumed by his secret. Rowling describes how he grows paler and thinner, how the swagger is gone, replaced by a kind of haunted determination. He spends hours in the Room of Requirement, obsessing over the vanishing cabinet, his only possible means of bringing Death Eaters into the school. This detail, glossed over quickly in the film, is central in the book. The cabinet represents his last hope of completing the task without directly killing Dumbledore, a loophole that still leaves him with a shred of humanity. By the climactic moment atop the astronomy tower, Draco's arc reaches its most tragic point. The film shows him cornering Dumbledore, wand shaking, unable to deliver the killing curse. But the novel makes clear just how profound this hesitation is. Draco is terrified, yet his heart is not cruel enough to murder. Draco Malfoy's wand was trembling in his hand. His pale face was rigid, his mouth pulled taut, his eyes wide with fear. Half-Blood Prince, Chapter 27. Dumbledore does not see a murderer in front of him, but a boy trapped in a nightmare. He appeals to Draco's better nature, offering him protection for his family, showing him that he still has a choice. In that moment, Draco's arrogance has completely dissolved, replaced by raw vulnerability. What makes this scene heartbreaking is that Draco never makes the choice to kill. He lowers his wand slightly, unable to speak the words of the killing curse. It is Snape who arrives to finish the task, honoring the unbreakable vow and preserving Draco's life, but in doing so, taking the stain of murder upon himself. For viewers of the films, it can appear as if Draco merely lacked courage, but readers of the book understand that this is the essence of his humanity. He could not kill, even under immense pressure. That single act of defiance, even if born of fear rather than moral conviction, sets Draco apart from true Death Eaters. After this night, Draco's role in the story diminishes, but his depth remains. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, his reluctance to fully commit to Voldemort's side becomes even clearer. At Malfoy Manor, when Harry, Ron and Hermione are captured and brought before his family, Draco is asked to confirm their identities. The moment is chilling, for it shows the final fracture between the boy he was and the man Voldemort wanted him to become. Draco hesitates, refusing to give a clear answer. His silence is dangerous, for it could be seen as disobedience, yet he cannot bring himself to betray his school rivals to certain death. It is another small act of resistance, subtle yet telling. The films reduce this hesitation to a few seconds of screen time, but the novel lingers on it, showing how Draco's reluctance exposes cracks in Voldemort's control over even his closest followers. This small rebellion is the echo of the boy crying in the bathroom, the boy who could not cast the curse on the tower. In these moments, Draco proves that he is not merely a coward nor a true believer, but someone struggling to survive without losing the last shred of himself. He is not heroic in the traditional sense, but he is deeply human. Even at the Battle of Hogwarts, Draco is portrayed as conflicted. He is dragged into the chaos, not leading it. He is found with Crabbe and Goyle, cornered in the room of requirement, more a victim of circumstance than a mastermind of evil. When Harry saves his life, first from the cursed fiend fire that kills Crabbe, and later from certain death at Voldemort's side, it becomes clear that Draco's journey is not about victory or defeat. It is about survival, about a boy who was never given a true choice until it was too late. The most telling conclusion to Draco's arc comes not in the war itself, but in the epilogue, set 19 years later. Draco is no longer the arrogant prince of Slytherin, nor the terrified pawn of Voldemort. He is a father standing on the platform at King's Cross, sending his son Scorpius to Hogwarts. The scars of the war linger in the stiffness of his nod toward Harry, a silent acknowledgement of shared history. This moment is brief, but it signals that Draco has chosen a different path. He survived the darkness without fully succumbing to it, and now his focus is on giving his child a life free of the burdens that defined his own youth. The omission of these nuances in the films leaves audiences with a flattened version of Draco Malfoy. To the casual viewer, he is remembered as a sneering schoolboy, cowardly in the face of danger, overshadowed by Harry's bravery. Yet readers of the novels know better. They recognize the quiet tragedy of a boy raised in privilege, only to discover that privilege could not shield him from terror. They remember his tears, his hesitation, his small acts of resistance that the screen failed to capture. Draco's story is not one of villainy, but of entrapment, survival, and the fragile line between choice and coercion. Rowling never redeems Draco in the same way she redeems characters like Severus Snape, but she does something more subtle. She shows us that even those raised in darkness are not entirely lost. Draco is a reminder that cruelty in youth can mask fear, that arrogance can crumble under pressure, and that even the son of a Death Eater can falter before committing murder. His journey from a sneering boy to a man quietly living with the past is one of the most compelling hidden stories in the Harry Potter saga, one that the films chose not to fully tell. Number 21, The Story of Morsmorda. The dark mark, conjured by the incantation Morsmorda, is one of the most chilling creations in J.K. Rowling's universe, and yet, in the films, it is strangely muted, almost a decorative flourish of Voldemort's followers. On screen, we see it fleetingly, appearing in the night sky after the Quidditch World Cup riot, a mysterious green skull with a serpent slithering from its mouth. But the true weight of this spell, its terror and psychological power, is buried within the pages of the books. In the novels, the dark mark is no casual bit of dark magic. It is a declaration of death, a harbinger of horror, a symbol that froze entire communities with fear. To understand its meaning is to understand why the Death Eaters were not just Voldemort's henchmen, but a movement of terror that turned the magical world into a place of constant dread. When we return to Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the moment after the Quidditch World Cup becomes a defining example. Harry, Hermione, and the Weasleys stumble into the forest after the chaos caused by masked figures terrorizing Muggles. What follows is the sudden, terrible sight of the dark mark being launched into the sky by Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as a house elf's act. Rowling describes the scene vividly. A massive green skull with a serpent protruding from its mouth like a tongue slowly rose high above the trees, casting a greenish light over the whole forest clearing. The words, conjure. An image not of a pretty symbol, but of something malignant, crawling, alive. It is not merely a picture in the sky, it is a threat that echoes in the hearts of those who lived through Voldemort's first reign of terror. Characters who remember the First War react with visceral horror, something entirely absent from the films. In the book, Mr. Weasley's first instinct is panic, and the crowd that gathers beneath the mark trembles with recognition. "That's his mark!" someone cries. "You know whose mark?" The terror was immediate and collective. Wizards who had once cowered in their homes during the 1970s saw the symbol as the return of a nightmare they thought was buried. This is the power of Morsmorda, not the green light itself, but the shared trauma it triggers, the memories of families murdered in cold blood, the fear that the Dark Lord had returned. The books reveal how the Dark Mark was not merely a signal in the sky, but a calling card left above the homes of the slain. Every victim of Voldemort and his followers was branded in death with this grisly signature. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Professor Slughorn reminds Harry and Hermione of this dreadful practice when recalling the height of Voldemort's power. The Dark Mark was a signal, Harry, a sign of death. Wherever it appeared, it meant that someone had been killed. The chilling simplicity of this sentence encapsulates the role of the spell. It was not optional, not a flourish. It was part of Voldemort's warfare, psychological and absolute. Consider the scene in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire when Winky is discovered beneath the mark. The book carefully illustrates how even hardened wizards, ministry officials no less, respond with trembling voices, terrified eyes. The sheer presence of the mark caused grown witches and wizards to lose their composure. This is no carnival trick. This is a reminder of how Voldemort cultivated fear as carefully as he cultivated loyalty. Through Morsmorda, the Dark Lord controlled hearts and minds before his physical presence was even necessary. The symbol itself did his bidding. The films, however, reduced this terror to a passing spectacle. At the Quidditch World Cup, the mark flickers above the sky, but the audience in the theatre does not feel the heart-stopping fear that Rowling's prose captures. The ministry officials act stern, but not broken. Arthur Weasley's reaction is calm compared to his panic in the book. There is no whispering crowd, no sense of reliving a nightmare. The result is that the cinematic Death Eaters appear as costumed thugs playing a part rather than the agents of terror they truly were. The Dark Mark becomes a decorative brand rather than the psychological weapon it was meant to be. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, the gravity of the Dark Mark is emphasized again after the discovery of Emmeline Vance's murder. The wizarding community wakes to see the mark suspended above her home, and the reaction is one of despair and inevitability. They all knew what it meant, Rowling notes, the symbol that had once struck terror into them during Voldemort's first reign of terror. This detail, casually omitted in the films, shows how the mark was Voldemort's most efficient form of propaganda. He did not need newspapers or speeches. One skull in the sky and the entire community trembled. The black mark also connects deeply to Harry's own journey. As a boy who lost his parents to Voldemort, the symbol carries personal weight. When he first sees it above the forest in Goblet of Fire, he is paralyzed, not out of confusion, but because he is facing a literal manifestation of the curse that tore his life apart. It is a visual reminder of his parents' deaths, of the night in Godric's Hollow when Voldemort left his mark upon the world. The films never draw this connection. The dark mark floats above like a set piece, rather than as a mirror to Harry's trauma and the scar he carries. To understand Mors Morda is to understand Voldemort's philosophy of domination. He never killed silently. Murder was not simply the removal of an enemy. It was an announcement, a message, a performance. Every dark mark in the sky was both a tombstone and a billboard, reminding the survivors that resistance was futile. The brilliance of the spell lies not in its magical complexity, but in its psychological genius. Voldemort understood that fear, more than any wand, keeps populations obedient. When Rowling writes about the First Wizarding War, she paints the mark as omnipresent, a shadow across society. The terror it inspired, you have no idea, Lupin tells Harry in Half-Blood Prince. The sight of it hovering over a house, and then you knew what you'd find inside. These words reveal the emotional devastation attached to the symbol. Families did not just grieve their dead, they were haunted by the green skull that hovered above their homes, a public declaration of their loss. The films, by ignoring this cultural memory, deny viewers a chance to fully grasp the despair that hung over Wizarding Britain. The inconsistency between book and film is perhaps most striking in the Department of Mysteries scene. When Death Eaters emerge from the shadows, Rowling describes them as bearing the mark upon their arms, each branded with the emblem of loyalty and servitude. The films hint at this but never show the true extent of the mark's dual role, a magical tattoo and a public curse. The arm-bound mark is what ties the Death Eaters together, but the sky-bound mark is what ties the world in fear. These two halves create the whole of Voldemort's system of control, a detail blurred in cinematic adaptation. The strength of the dark mark lies also in its universality. Any wizard who glimpsed the skull and serpent immediately understood its meaning. It required no words, no explanation, no translation. Unlike propaganda posters or slogans, it spoke directly to the subconscious, to the primal fear of death and powerlessness. It was Voldemort's language of terror, universal and undeniable. Rowling ensured that even characters as brave as Sirius Black and Alastor Moody respected its potency. Moody, with all his hardened cynicism, still warned Harry of the terror it once sowed, a warning the films never bother to echo. The single moment when the films capture a fragment of this horror comes in The Half-Blood Prince, when Harry and Dumbledore arrive at the Burrow to find the mark glowing above a burning building. Yet even here, the image is fleeting, a visual cue more than a narrative weight. There is no whisper of the countless families who saw this sight in the 1970s, no explanation of its history. It is reduced to set dressing, a green skull in the night, rather than the symbol of an era's darkest memories. What should have been a moment of bone-deep dread becomes another special effect. If one wishes to grasp the essence of the Death Eaters, it is not enough to picture men and women in masks. Their power lay not in their numbers, but in their ability to make every witch and wizard fear that they might be next. Mors Morda was the purest manifestation of that power. It was Voldemort's way of writing his name in the sky, etching his presence onto the hearts of all who looked up. Without the proper weight of this detail, the films reduce him to a villain without a signature weapon of fear, robbing his reign of its true psychological depth. Ultimately, the dark mark represents the way Rowling intertwines magic with meaning. Spells are not just mechanical tools, they are symbols, metaphors, extensions of ideology. Morsmorda is not about conjuring green light. It is about announcing death, about instilling dread, about ensuring that the world remembers who wields power. Every time the skull appeared in the books, it whispered the same message: Voldemort was here, and he was watching. The films, by failing to embrace that terror, give us a Voldemort who is dangerous, yes, but never truly horrifying. Number 22, The Fate of Cho Chang. Cho Chang was never meant to be just a fleeting crush in the Harry Potter saga. In J.K. Rowling's books, her character is crafted as a young witch caught between grief, loyalty, and the complexities of first love. She represents something much larger than the awkward first kiss moment the films reduced her to. The truth is that Cho is one of the first characters through whom readers see the cost of war on ordinary students at Hogwarts. Her story is full of unspoken pain, quiet moments of fragility, and a tangled romance that illustrates the difficulty of growing up during a time of fear. When the films brushed past this, they erased a significant part of the series' emotional fabric. The first true glimpse into Cho's depth comes in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. She is introduced not simply as the girl Harry likes, but as Cedric Diggory's girlfriend. Cedric's presence in the story is a symbol of fairness and goodness, and Cho's relationship with him anchors her in that sense of stability. Harry's struggle to ask her to the Yule Ball is not just comic relief, but the beginning of a real emotional arc. Yet the key turning point for Cho comes with Cedric's death. In the book's tragic ending, Cedric is murdered before her eyes in the Triwizard Tournament. Rowling spares no detail about the devastation Cedric's death causes. It is not just Harry who carries trauma. Cho's grief becomes a quiet shadow over the following year. By the time Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix begins, Cho is a changed person. Rowling allows the reader to feel the raw weight of her mourning. She is not just the pretty girl in Ravenclaw, but a teenager who has lost someone she deeply loved. This grief is a lens through which she interacts with Harry. Their connection is not just about attraction, it is also about shared trauma. Harry is haunted by Cedric's murder because he was there, and Cho is haunted because she was in love with Cedric. Rowling writes this with heartbreaking subtlety. At one point, Cho breaks down while on a date with Harry at Madame Puddifoot's tea shop, where she begins to cry while talking about Cedric. Harry, awkward and emotionally unprepared, fails to comfort her. He later admits in frustration that he just wanted to talk about Quidditch. This tension illustrates how their relationship is doomed by timing and emotional scars. The films reduce this complicated story into an almost comical sequence. The infamous kissing scene in the Room of Requirement, where Harry and Cho share their first kiss, is presented with humor, as if it were an innocent and slightly clumsy teenage moment. But in the book, this kiss is steeped in grief. Rowling writes, "She was crying. Harry felt awkward and embarrassed, but he let her cry into his shoulder." This is not light-hearted comedy. It is the fragile attempt of two broken people to find comfort in each other. The kiss is not about passion, but about survival. It is about Cho seeking warmth in someone who understands, and Harry being pulled into emotions he does not yet know how to handle. The relationship collapses quickly, and not because of petty reasons. One of the sharpest examples is Cho's friendship with Marietta Edgecombe, the girl who betrays Dumbledore's army to Dolores Umbridge. In the book, Cho defends Marietta after Hermione's jinx permanently scars her with the word sneak across her face. Cho argues that Marietta was under pressure and had strict parents in the ministry. This defense places her in direct conflict with Harry and Hermione, who see Marietta's betrayal as inexcusable. Here, Cho is portrayed as loyal to her friends, even when they make mistakes. That loyalty, however, costs her Harry's trust. Their romance unravels not because of superficial teenage drama, but because grief, divided loyalties, and war create wounds too deep to bridge. What the films ignore is how Cho's arc represents the moral complexity of adolescence in wartime. She is a victim of loss, trying to rebuild herself. She wants to hold on to Harry because he is connected to Cedric, yet she cannot separate the boy she likes from the trauma that surrounds him. Rowling captures this duality with painful accuracy. In one of their most telling interactions, Harry is bewildered by Cho's tears, thinking she might still love Cedric. He cannot understand that grief and love often coexist. Rowling gives Cho the space to embody that contradiction, but the films flatten her into a mere side character whose only role is to be Harry's temporary love interest. The portrayal of Cho in the books also speaks to a universal truth about young love in difficult times. First relationships often carry the burden of immaturity, misunderstanding, and insecurity. Add to that the stress of a war against Voldemort, the fear of betrayal inside Hogwarts, and the memory of a murdered boyfriend, and Cho's behavior becomes entirely human. She lashes out, she cries, she clings to Harry, and she defends her friends. These are not signs of weakness, but of a teenager overwhelmed by forces larger than herself. Rowling's writing makes her deeply relatable, while the films turn her into a punchline about Harry's awkwardness with girls. Another detail worth remembering is how Cho represents the Ravenclaw house. Too often, Ravenclaws are sidelined in favor of Gryffindors and Slytherins. Cho, however, shows Ravenclaw qualities of loyalty, empathy, and intelligence. She is not blind to Marietta's betrayal, but insists on seeing her friend as more than her mistakes. This perspective is not foolishness, but compassion. The films never explore this, choosing instead to paint Cho as a weak link who accidentally betrays Dumbledore's army. In fact, in the movie, she is the one who reveals the group to Umbridge, while in the book, it is Marietta. This is a major distortion that alters the audience's perception of her character. By shifting the blame, the films remove Cho's loyalty and make her look like a traitor, when in truth, Rowling wrote her as someone struggling between personal loyalties and larger battles. What makes Cho so important is not that she was Harry's first girlfriend, but that she shows how war corrodes innocence. Cedric's death does not only make Harry grow up, it changes Cho forever. She embodies the idea that the fight against Voldemort had collateral damage, even among those who were not on the front lines. Teenagers lost boyfriends, friends betrayed each other, and grief consumed people before they ever set foot on a battlefield. Cho's tears are not just about love lost, but about youth stolen. She is the face of a generation of Hogwarts students forced to carry burdens too heavy for their years. One cannot ignore how her relationship with Harry influences him as well. Though Harry never truly falls deeply in love with Cho, their short romance teaches him about empathy and the complexity of grief. He learns that affection cannot heal trauma, that love is not always enough to mend someone who is mourning. These lessons prepare him for his later relationship with Ginny, where he approaches her with more maturity and respect. In this way, Cho's role is pivotal. Without her, Harry would not have understood the difference between attraction and true companionship. The films miss this development, making her seem irrelevant, when in reality she shapes Harry's understanding of relationships. Even in her eventual absence from Harry's life, Cho's presence lingers. By the time of Half-Blood Prince, Harry is no longer distracted by Cho, but the memory of their failed relationship remains. It is not spoken aloud, but readers sense that Harry has carried the awkwardness and the lessons with him. Cho herself fades into the background, yet her arc is complete. She is a girl who loved who lost, who defended her friends, and who ultimately could not find peace in the chaos. The tragedy of her story is not that she disappears from the narrative, but that her pain is never fully acknowledged by those around her. The truth is that Cho Chang is one of Rowling's most quietly tragic characters. While Harry, Ron, and Hermione fight openly against Voldemort, Cho fights an internal battle against grief and betrayal. Her story reminds us that not every casualty of war is visible. Some are carried in tears, in fractured friendships, and in the silence left by those who died too soon. The film's decision to simplify her into an awkward subplot robs the story of its emotional resonance. For readers, Cho is a mirror reflecting the fragility of adolescence under siege. She is a reminder that war leaves no one untouched, not even the girl Harry once thought he simply wanted to take to a ball. Ultimately, Cho Chang was never a side note. She was a symbol. Her love for Cedric, her failed attempt with Harry, her defense of Marietta, and her quiet mourning all contribute to the richness of Rowling's world. In neglecting this in the films, a crucial part of the story was lost. Cho is not just the girl of Harry's first kiss. She is the girl who shows us that even in a world of magic, grief is very real, and sometimes the bravest thing a teenager can do is simply survive it. Number 23. The Invisible Knight of Gryffindor. Of all the small but vivid details J.K. Rowling placed in the Harry Potter books, few are as overlooked as the knight who never truly walked the halls of the movies. In the pages of the novels, the Hogwarts corridors are alive, not only with moving staircases and enchanted suits of armor, but with portraits that speak, argue, laugh, and provoke. Among these painted figures, one of the most memorable is the Knight of the Portrait, a figure clad in full armor who lives for nothing but dueling and dramatic posturing. His presence is brief compared to central characters, yet his appearances add a tone of absurdity and charm to the castle's atmosphere. Rowling's careful insertion of this minor figure makes the castle pulse with personality, showing that Hogwarts is not just walls and students, but a living ecosystem where even the paintings demand attention. The knight appears in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, a book already overflowing with mysteries about Sirius Black and the Dementors. Amidst this heavy narrative, Rowling sprinkles moments of comic relief, and the dueling knight serves exactly this purpose. Harry, Ron, and Hermione encounter him more than once, and every time the knight reacts with the same exuberant desire to challenge them to combat. He draws his sword dramatically, demanding a duel, only to be brushed aside by the students, who are far more concerned with real dangers than a portrait's theatrics. This small moment serves as a reminder that while Hogwarts can be a place of darkness and danger, it is also full of oddities that make the school feel believable, like any old institution, with eccentric characters lurking in unexpected corners. The absence of this figure in the films reveals something important about adaptation. The filmmakers had to condense sprawling novels into hours-long films, cutting secondary characters, subplots, and minor details. Yet the exclusion of the knight removes more than just a comic beat. It strips away a piece of Hogwarts' identity. In the books, when the students walk through a corridor, the portraits are never merely background scenery. They shout, comment, or demand recognition. The dueling knight exemplifies this by insisting on his relevance every time someone passes his frame. Without him, the films present a castle that feels visually grand but spiritually quieter, missing the cacophony of voices that Rowling carefully wove into her world. Rowling describes the knight's antics with an unmistakable humorous tone. At one point, the book notes, "A knight in a painting on the wall had just clanked out of sight, muttering about cowardly students." This sentence, so quickly read, reveals a great deal. The knight is self-important, convinced of his own honor, and wholly uninterested in whether anyone else shares his passion for dueling. The humor comes not only from his demands, but from the way students, used to the absurdity of Hogwarts life, hardly pay him attention. He is an echo of a chivalric tradition that no longer matters. Yet, He refuses to fade quietly into the background of the school's history. The Knight also highlights Rowling's mastery of world-building. Portraits in Hogwarts are not passive decorations. They are fragments of personalities, guardians of memory, and in some cases vital participants in the school's secrets. The Fat Lady famously guards the entrance to Gryffindor Tower, while Phineas Nigellus Black serves as a spy and reluctant informant in Dumbledore's office. The Knight, however, exists for no grand purpose. His role is smaller but equally important in making the world authentic. By having portraits with no utility other than entertainment, Rowling reinforces the idea that Hogwarts is not designed for readers' convenience. It is a place where useless eccentricities exist, just as in any real institution. For Harry and his friends, the Knight represents an annoyance rather than a danger. They are confronted with his challenges at times when they are rushing to class or fleeing real threats. The absurdity of being stopped by a painted knight demanding a duel becomes even more striking when set against the real fear of Dementors lurking on the school grounds. Rowling uses contrast effectively here. The terrifying and the ridiculous coexist side by side. A student can narrowly escape death and then, moments later, be challenged to a duel by a portrait swinging a painted sword. That mixture of tones is what makes Hogwarts feel both enchanting and unpredictable. The Knight also provides an indirect commentary on Gryffindor values. Gryffindor House prides itself on bravery, chivalry, and courage. Yet here is a caricature of those very ideals reduced to a blustering portrait who insists on dueling everyone he meets. His presence raises subtle questions about what true courage looks like. Is it found in posturing and challenges, or in the quiet endurance of people like Neville Longbottom, who stands up to his friends in the first book? The Knight's exaggerated code of honor, the superficial understanding of bravery, suggesting that true Gryffindor strength lies not in dramatics, but in sacrifice and conviction. The decision to omit the Knight from the films underscores how adaptations prioritize narrative efficiency over texture. Audiences watching the films miss out on this microcosm of Hogwarts life, where even the portraits behave unpredictably. While the movies are visually stunning, they often reduce the castle to a set of moving staircases and talking door guardians. In the books, however, a walk through Hogwarts is never silent. Portraits quarrel, offer advice, or throw challenges. Without the Knight, the films lose a piece of Hogwarts chaos, leaving the corridors too quiet, too much like an ordinary boarding school with magical decorations. This absence is felt most strongly in moments of levity. In Prisoner of Azkaban, as Harry grapples with the fear of Sirius Black breaking into the castle, the Knight offers a comic interruption. He believes he is defending the school by challenging suspicious students, but in reality, he is just a nuisance. The humour provides relief in a narrative otherwise filled with tension. Without him, the films lean heavily into the darkness, rarely pausing for absurdity. The Knight's antics remind the reader that not every problem at Hogwarts is deadly. Some are simply irritating in the most magical of ways. Rowling's placement of the Knight also reveals her affection for English traditions of literature and folklore. The figure of the bumbling knight appears throughout medieval-inspired tales, a man trapped by outdated notions of honour. Don Quixote famously tilts at windmills, mistaking them for enemies. Similarly, the Hogwarts Knight fights imaginary duels, convinced of his importance in a world that has already moved past him. He becomes a literary wink, a playful nod to readers familiar with the trope of the deluded warrior. Hogwarts is richer for including this echo of tradition, showing that its walls hold not only magical power but also cultural memory. For Harry, Ron and Hermione, the Knight's presence creates small but memorable interruptions in their journey. He forces them to sidestep, to roll their eyes, and to carry on with their real challenges. These moments emphasize the everyday life of Hogwarts. Not every corner holds a deadly mystery. Sometimes it holds a ridiculous obstacle. This layering of experiences, serious and absurd, frightening and silly, creates the tapestry of Hogwarts life. It prevents the story from sinking too deeply into darkness, always reminding the reader that the magical world is not just about survival, but also about laughter and exasperation. The night also contributes to the atmosphere of unpredictability that defines Hogwarts. The school is not safe, but it is also not predictable. Students never know whether a staircase will move, whether Peeves will hurl chalk at them, or whether a knight in armour will demand a duel in the corridor. This unpredictability is part of what makes Hogwarts enchanting. It is not merely a school, it is a place where magic manifests in countless small ways. Removing the knight in the films makes the castle too orderly, too controlled, stripping away some of the charm that keeps readers returning to the books. One of the most striking things about the knight is that he is utterly useless in the grand narrative. He does not help Harry defeat Voldemort, nor does he reveal hidden secrets. Yet his presence matters precisely because it is unnecessary. Life is filled with eccentric characters who play no grand role in history, but make the world feel alive. Rowling mirrors this truth in her writing. The dueling knight does not matter to the plot, but he matters to the texture of Hogwarts. His absence in the films reveals how difficult it is to capture the fullness of Rowling's imagination on screen.